Hello guys, Robert1 here, coming at you with a new Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. And in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Video, we are going to be doing a discussion on the extra deck, its implications, its problems, and basically how we can change it to essentially fix it and make it a better resource, and just essentially make it so it's better for the game, so it's not so degenerate anymore. Because let's be honest guys, the extra deck is a big problem in the game right now, being that it has so many problems in the game, seeing as it's causing so many problems, such as utilizing cards such as firewalls, such as being able to extra link your opponent, such as being able to have access to every resource just to out your opponent, that it's gotten to the point where the extra deck really does need to be changed, because we haven't seen a big change in the extra deck in over a decade, since they changed it from unlimited extra deck space to 15 extra deck space. And I really did want to talk about this because it's a subject in the game right now that has so many different theories, so many different faults, so many ways to change it, that I just wanted to give a few ideas of what we could use to change it and what we could do to change the extra deck. So that's essentially going to be this video. I am going to start off by saying some decks that do abuse the extra deck, just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about, and we're just going to go ahead from there and see what happens. So the first few decks that the decks that I really wanted to mention that can abuse the extra deck to a degree that isn't really fair. Starting off with the Dark Warrior Turbo deck that uses Dangers, Malicious, Vion, Dark Armageddonite, all these strategies to essentially get to a point where you can control a Rongomniac with more than 5 materials. Abuse of the extra deck if I haven't seen so before, because the extra deck can actually abuse cards like Isolde, like Firewall, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it can extra link because of it. It has cards like Soul Charge and other means to get to it. Another deck that really does abuse the extra deck, Goki, being able to just U-link your opponent so your opponent can't actually utilize their extra deck at all. Is another problem. Really does abuse the extra deck in that sense, and isn't really fair because of it uses the extra deck to utilize all these link monsters to essentially create a U board, get a ton of advantage off the U board, and still be basically FTK your opponent because they can't use the extra deck monster zone. And another deck being Danger Dark World, also known as Danger FTK, which can either U-link your opponent or essentially, I'm gonna FTK you using Firewall. And yeah, big problem with a lot of these decks is Firewall, but we know they're not going to ban it, so might as well change the extra deck so they can keep it and make it not as broken as it already is. And another deck that I did want to mention is also Pendulum Magicians, being able to utilize stuff like Electromite, being able to utilize stuff like Vortex Dragon, and just being able to utilize the entire Pendulum area of their extra deck to a degree where they can just spam the board and not give enough of a damn. These are all decks that really do utilize the extra deck, and these are kind of the reasons why I feel like these changes need to be made to the extra deck, because it also kind of makes it fairer on the game. And also, a lot of these changes are due to other decks as well that I've been thinking about, like Mayukashi being able to just deck out your opponent because they can just keep synchro climbing up into their level 11 monster and then just kill you from there. There's also other decks such as the Prank Kids, being able to just utilize both Link and Fusion monsters, being able to just utilize those to essentially kill you, Raigeki you, Heavy Storm Dust you, whatever that may be. But these are all decks that I feel like those are just two newer options that need to be addressed to a degree, and touching these sorts of areas of the decks can help, and most likely will help in the long run. So, what are some of the options that I actually have to fix the extra deck? Now, the first option that I really did want to talk about is essentially limit the amount of copies of a card you can play in an extra deck. Now, obviously, we already have that sort of thing with the ban list, being able to stop your opponent from using a certain amount of copies of Exciton Knight, being able to stop your opponent from using a certain copies of other extra deck monsters, stopping you from using any kind of copies like Construct or Emerald. But I feel like if we limited the amount of actual copies we could use in the extra deck, say to 1 or 2 instead of just being able to use 3 of a copy, it would actually help quite a bit. Now, if we did this, it would obviously make a big change to the game. Obviously, it would mean that cards like Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries would be a lot more powerful. It would mean that we have a lot of other options in the game to actually slip into our extra deck and actually have more options to change, such as if you're playing other cards, if you're playing a deck such as Goki, sure, you can still U-Link, but you can't U-Link as easy anymore because you're only able to run one copy of Cerberus, one copy of Phoenix. So you actually have to save those resources a bit more and be more careful with how you utilize those cards. And also, it also has the potential to hinder decks as well, because looking at the format right now, we have decks such as Thunder Dragon, for instance, which if you take away 2 of their Colossus, they're not going to be in the greatest situation because they need multiple Colossus to actually build a board. Now, the deck will still be able to play with 1 Colossus, but it will be a lot harder for them because if your opponent negates that 1 Colossus, then it completely wipes them out. But the potential to the good things about this, being able to limit the amount of extra deck cards in the extra deck, is that will take away from the essential problems from all these extra decks. It will mean that you only have to really deal with 1 card. It will mean that you only have to really deal with the 1 boss monster, and it will be a lot more. And it would mean that your opponent actually has to think more about what they put in their extra deck. Seeing as if you could play only 1 Colossus, what could you use to replace the 2 Colossuses? Or if you could only play 1. Altergeist Hextia, for instance, what other extra deck cards could you play? Would you play the other Altergeist Link 2? Would you play Banshee? Or if you're playing a hero deck, what hero monsters would you put in exchange? Would you play an Omni hero deck? Or would you stick to a normal masked hero deck? Like, it comes down to stuff like that. If you limit the amount of extra deck monsters you actually can play in the extra deck to 1 or 2 if you want to be more fairer, then it would mean that your opponent would have a lot more options. It would mean that your opponent would have to think more. It would help improve strategy and deck building in general, in my opinion, because if we see a format where we can only use 1 copy of every extra deck monster, then I could see a lot more hybrid decks coming out of the woodwork. I could see a lot more creativity coming out of the woodwork, and I could see a lot more thoughts coming out of the woodwork as well, because seeing implications to changing the extra deck, such as limiting extra cards, means that your opponent will actually have to think more. What options, what text could I play? Would I want to play something like Exciton? Could my deck support something like Exciton? Would I want to play something like Stardust? Could my deck support something like Stardust? Could I play Black Rose? Would my deck support that? Like, these are all factors that you've got to think about when you're building an extra deck now, if you do limit the amount of copies in the extra deck. And that's just one of the things that I wanted to talk about. The next thing that I actually want to talk about is kind of similar but a little different, limiting the amount of copies of an extra deck type you could have in the extra deck. So this is basically saying I'm going to limit you from having only 5 links, 5 fusions, 5 synchros, and 5 Xyz monsters in your extra deck. Now, if they did something like this, they would also have to increase the extra deck size to 20 because we currently have 4 different summoning mechanics in the extra deck. But what would this essentially do for the game if this was a change to the game that they possibly made? Well, first of all, it would mean that your opponent can still U-Link you, but they have to wait. U-Links would become a lot less inconsistent because you wouldn't be able to perform them as easy anymore, because you're only able to use 5 Link monsters, and the 5 Link monsters would have to all be incorporated into an extra Link. Now, obviously the Link monsters, if you're building an extra Link deck, would be focused around the Nightmares. You would play 1 Unicorn, you could play 2 Mermaid, you could play 1 Phoenix, 1 Cerberus, and then 1 Link 2 that points sideways. That would be the main extra deck monsters that you would be focusing on if you wanted to use 5 Link monsters. If you're playing something like Thunder Dragons, then obviously you would play the 3 Colossus, the 3 Titan, because that's how you would want to utilize that extra deck space. If you're playing an Xyz archetype, then you're going to be wanting to use your archetype specific monsters with also other cards such as Exciton Knight, such as possibly Honor Arc, for instance. Like, you would want to use stuff like that. And in synchro-based decks, it would kill stuff, it would hurt stuff like the Mayukashi a lot, but I feel like we could see a lot more deck building aspects from the Mayukashi, being able to basically try to utilize bigger synchro monsters or bigger zombie monsters to essentially go into their bigger synchros to essentially be able to climb down the ladder, which would actually be interesting to see, because it means that people would actually change their opinion on how they would build their Mayukashi extra deck. Or in Prank Kids, for instance, sure they will only run 5 fusions, 5 links, but they'll most likely run 3 Doodle, 1 Bow Wow, and then 1 the Dragon Roar or a Borrelsword or Borreload. Or if they're playing and their fusions, they'll probably play 2 Butler, 2 Rocket, and 1 of the water one. It would limit the amount they could play of each link monster, but it'd also boost their other things, because they could incorporate synchros into their deck. They could incorporate XCs into their deck, such as Toad, such as any rank, like rank 3, any rank 1. And also with the fusion aspect as well, they could also still incorporate Thunder Dragons into the deck. They would just have to limit the amount of rockets or the amount of butlers that they play. And that would be something interesting to see in that area as well, because if you're limiting the amount of extra deck size that you can actually play, then it's a lot more interesting to see what people can do. It would increase the amount of deck building people would play. It would make people think more about how they would utilize the extra deck, which I personally think would be very interesting to see how people would utilize the extra deck by playing 5 of each type of monster. It would be like, oh, can I actually tech this card? Could I utilize this card? Will this improve my deck building? Will this change how I build my deck? Like, it's something it's one of those sort of factors that you've got to think about when incorporating something like this into the game, and I feel like it would just generate more deck building. Now, that's that one. Now, there's other ways to fix the extra deck as well. Like, you can fix the extra deck by increasing or decreasing the extra deck size. Now, I would be for increasing if I wanted to have more options, but if I wanted to hinder the amount of extra deck space that people could use, basically hindering the amount of link monsters people could use, basically hindering the amount of cards they can actually play in their extra deck, the amount of text they can use, the amount of ways that they can play the game, I would go for decrease it. And if I was to decrease it, I would only decrease it by 5, because having 10 extra deck spots means that you actually have to think what you're going to play. What's most important? What do I need more than anything? What can I tech? What do I not need? What do I definitely need? And if you're increasing it, I wouldn't increase it more than 20, because it would also be like, ooh, what can I incorporate into this? What can I choose? What could I incorporate? What extra cards can I incorporate? What could I use to actually help me improve my game state? Like, both of these have their good sides and bad sides. But if you increase or decrease the extra deck, it would be a big change to the game. Because if you decreased it, it would mean that there's a lot of issues in the game. You would decrease the amount of creativity in the extra deck. It would be more archetype based, and unless you're playing a deck that really revolves around doing cheeky shenanigans, you're not going to see a lot of creativity. But it will also limit the amount of shenanigans that are in the extra deck, the amount of extra link garbage that is in the extra deck, and just limit the amount of cards that you would actually have to play. But if you increase the extra deck, then that also gives the opponent more options to have potential to extra link you, have potential to just do more stuff against you, have potential to actually kill you. But also it gives you more options to have ways to out the extra link. It gives you more ways to out the problems that they have. It gives you more ways to essentially deal with it. And I just said you could out the extra link. If they've linked you, you're not using your extra deck. What am I saying? It basically gives you more options. If you increase it, it's more options. If you decrease it, it's less options. That's the problem and good thing about the extra deck as well. And the last way to actually fix the extra deck, in my personal opinion, is limit the amount of times you can summon from the extra deck. Now, the extra deck has always been a resource. Always been a resource that could potentially gives you infinite options. It gives you infinite options to U-Link, it gives you infinite options to kill your opponent, it gives you infinite options of ways to deal with your opponent. But if you limit the amount of times that your opponent can actually summon from the extra deck, like cards like Summon Limit, it will take away options from your opponent. It will mean that, oh, if I'm going to U-Link, I'm going to have to wait. If I'm going to do this specific combo, then I best make sure that these are the right cards that I use in my extra deck at this time. Like, and if you're limiting the amount of times you can summon to the from the extra deck, I would say limit it to 2, because if you limit it to 2, then that means Pendulums still have an option from the extra deck. It gives people still ways to summon multiple cards from the extra deck, but I wouldn't have more than 2. I wouldn't think having more than 2 times to summon from the extra deck would be fair if you would limit the amount of times you can actually summon from the extra deck. Now, obviously, again, this has its good sides and its bad sides. It takes away from the creativity in the extra deck that a lot of people like and a lot of people enjoy, and it takes away from the amount of times you can actually use the extra deck. But at the same time, it takes away from the degeneracy of the extra deck that we're seeing, where you can just summon multiple extra deck monsters per turn to either create the Dark Lord FTK, create a ton of different problems, and just in general look at these issues in general. But if you increase it, if you keep the amount of times you can summon from it the same, then we're going to be seeing tons of extra links, tons of FTKs that revolve around the extra deck. But if you limit it, then we see less extra links in the game. We see less amounts of FTKs in the game. And like, honestly, with all the FTKs that we've been seeing recently, the Gem Knight, the Pendulum, the Dark World, the Danger, they all revolve around the extra deck, and limiting the amount of times you can summon from the extra deck essentially solves that issue. But, guys, that's just my personal opinions on ways to fix the extra deck. Now, are any of these ideas good to you? Are any of these ideas bad to you? Tell me all of that in the comment section below, because I personally think capping the amount of cards you can play, it really does create more creativity for the extra deck. Capping the amount of types you can play really, again, increases the amount of creativity in the extra deck. Decreasing or increasing the size, I personally wouldn't choose this. I wouldn't increase or decrease the size of the extra deck, because it would just take away so much from the game. It would either cause more degeneracy or just mean we're using less cards, which I personally would not like, but it's a sort of option. And the amount of times you can summon from the extra deck, it's something that could happen and might happen if the game carries on the way it is, and might need to happen. But guys, those are just my thoughts and opinions. What do you personally think? Do you think the extra deck needs to be fixed? Do you think it doesn't need to be fixed? Do you think these options could be the way to fix it? Tell me all of that in the comment section below, because there are a lot of problems in the game right now revolving around the extra deck, and these are just some ways that I think could fix the extra deck. But yeah, guys, that's what I think. Tell me all your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like the video. If you want to see more Yu-Gi-Oh videos like this, don't forget to press the subscribe button to see more Yu-Gi-Oh content, such as duels, deck profiles, discussions, openings, anything along those lines. And if you want to be notified of any videos or streams that I do that are 8 PM UK time, don't forget to press the notification button for stuff like that as well. But yeah, guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Robot1, signing out. Extra deck needs to be fixed, sadly. Later, guys.